I'm so excited for the announcement tonight. Just tune in, pay attention, listen closely, and let's talk about 4 more years.
And Tim Scott went from being on the Trump plane, now he is on the stage, sharing it in New Hampshire with the former president. This is all particularly stinging to Nikki Haley because it was just a decade ago, more than a decade ago, when she was the governor of South Carolina and appointed Scott to the Senate.
It is with great pleasure that I am announcing that I am appointing our next U.S. Senator to be Congressman Tim Scott. He earned this seat for what I know he's going to do in making South Carolina and making our country proud.
That was then, this is now. Not only is this a snub, considering their history as once allies, but the timing of this announcement is also what matters here. We are 4 days out from the first in the nation primary in New Hampshire, where Haley has been campaigning aggressively and building momentum. A source close to Haley tells CNN that she did not know Scott was planning to go ahead with endorsing Trump tonight. I was told by a source that Haley called Senator Scott actually in recent days to ask for his endorsement. We've also learned that Trump's inner circle originally hoped this moment, where Tim Scott is endorsing Trump on stage, would actually come not now before New Hampshire, but instead before South Carolina's primary on February 24th. But the timeline moved up as Haley was seeing a spike in the polls in New Hampshire. All of this is, of course, part of a goal by the Trump campaign to paint Haley as someone who is disliked by those who know her best in her home state. In a statement after all of this, I should note that Haley responded saying, and I'm quoting her now, "Interesting that Trump's lining up with all the Washington insiders when he claimed that he wanted to drain the swamp." She's also likely referring to what we're seeing from other senators on Capitol Hill, Senator Marco Rubio, who also just endorsed Trump again. Another blow to Haley, especially in light of this.
Our next president will be Marco Rubio. Take a picture of this because the new group of conservatives that's taken over America looks like a Benetton commercial.
I'm joined now by the Republican strategist, Rina Shah, and the former deputy assistant to President Biden, Jamal Simmons. Rina, I think no one is surprised that Tim Scott is endorsing Donald Trump. But what I thought when I first saw this, when the New York Times broke it earlier today, was ouch, because he's choosing to do it not when people thought it would have the most impact before South Carolina, but before New Hampshire, where Nikki Haley was hoping to do her best potentially.
Tim Scott could have waited, and he probably should have waited until after Tuesday. But what this reeks of, him doing it at this point, is pettiness. And some people are not going to be willing to believe that about Tim Scott because he's so aw shucks nice. But I would say this, he's already shown us, number one, by making this endorsement, that he's not willing to put country over party. Number one, he's willing to go along with how Washington works. Washington takes care of their own. And that's how this is going to go. This is Tim Scott auditioning to be in the Trump administration this time. He wants to situate himself while also sticking it to Nikki Haley. They got in a lot of jabs during those debates. And I think the situation here is that there is love lost, but also this endorsement kind of means nothing, because who's it moving the needle with electorally? Evangelicals? Well, they've already still got a choice in Ron DeSantis. And Trump doesn't have to worry about evangelicals. He needs to worry about moving that moderate, independently minded voter. That's who he's having trouble with. And this is a distraction right now because that voter, the independently minded voter, is sitting in New Hampshire right now not caring about a Tim Scott endorsement. So I would say this is being, a lot of fanfare for kind of nothing.
Well, given what you said about the value of this endorsement, the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, has endorsed Nikki Haley. He's a big surrogate of hers, Jamal. Yeah. This is what he had to say about the Tim Scott endorsement.
Look, Tim Scott wouldn't have a job without Nikki Haley. Nobody cares what Tim Scott thinks. If they did, he actually wouldn't have been driven out of this race 3 months ago.
He also argued against the power of endorsements, even though he himself has endorsed yes. Nikki Haley, I should note.
It's funny. This either says something bad about Tim Scott or it says something bad about Nikki Haley, right? Either Tim Scott is disloyal and he's not, he didn't look out for the person who looked out for him, or Nikki Haley really has got no swing left in South Carolina, which means she's going to get trounced when she gets down there. It just feels like one of them is going to pay for this pretty badly. Today, based on the polls, it looks like Nikki Haley is that person. Mm-hmm. It looks like Tim Scott is getting on board with Donald Trump because he might want to be vice president. And according to our friend Bakari Sellers, who I saw on earlier, he's going to be he'd be a tough debater if he did end up in the vice presidential nominee slot. But I think I think this is one of these moments where you look at Tim Scott and you wonder, what is it that happened between the two of these people over the last few years that got him to the point where he's willing to come out in public and really trounce her in a place where people will look at this and say, wow, something must be wrong with Nikki Haley here?
Let's ask someone who might know that. We have Rob Godfrey here, who is a longtime player in South Carolina Republican politics, who knows both Haley and Scott and served as Nikki Haley's chief spokesperson when she was the governor. Rob, I'm glad to have you joining us here tonight. And as Jamal noted, this was a former ally of Nikki Haley's. Obviously, things have changed recently, but what do you make of the personal nature of this endorsement tonight?
That it may not be personal at all. That at the end of the day, Tim Scott was a candidate for president. Tim Scott has his own political future to look out for, and Tim Scott may see the writing on the wall that President Trump keeps a scorecard of who endorses him when. Tim Scott takes note of who endorses him when he's considering things like picks for the administration, picks for the cabinet down the road. And Tim Scott may well have made a personal calculation not to get back at anyone or to exact any revenge on anyone, but simply to do something that was in his own best interest, to pursue opportunities down the road, whether it's, as a member of the cabinet or it's for another elected office. And so politicians are allowed to do that, just as they're allowed to, run for whatever office that they want to run for.
Yeah. Well, Rob, actually,
can
we listen to Tim Scott, because he was just on stage in Concord in New Hampshire just truly minutes ago. Let's just listen to his endorsement of the former president.
You see, we need a president who doesn't see black or white. We see a president who sees Americans as one American family. You see, we need a president who doesn't see black or white. We see it.
Do you think he would? I'm skeptical of the idea that he would serve as vice president, just based on some conversations that I'd heard in Washington. But do you believe that is something that he would be open to doing based on what you just saw there?
So, when that kind of question comes, it's hard to anticipate what your answer would want to be, particularly if you're someone of service. Tim Scott has served as a county councilman. He served as a member of the State House. He served as a member of Congress and as a U.S. Senator. And when the nominee of your party or the president-elect of the United States asks you to serve, you consider it. So while he may not, a few weeks ago, have told you that he was seeking out the vice presidency or a spot in a potential administration, that could change if the question comes and it's a serious one. But at the end of the day, it's important to remember this. Both Nikki Haley and Tim Scott have, over the course of time, been allies and they've been friends. They've also underscored the fact that they don't take things like these presidential races all that personally. And so this is a small state where you have common friends, where you have common allies, where you have common donors, where you have members of, cabinets that serve, a governor right now who supports President Trump and who served the previous governor who's now running for president. All of these people remain friends, despite the fact that they may not be supporting, one of these three people who've run for president this year.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing to remember going forward in South Carolina.
We will see, Rob, we'll see if they continue to stay friends here. I mean, this is it's been a very personal race, certainly between Donald Trump and the attacks that he's directing at Nikki Haley. But Rina, when you look at Nikki Haley's trajectory here and what this means going forward for her, the other thing that Governor Sununu was saying earlier, which is that Nikki Haley doesn't need to, he said she's never needed to win New Hampshire. Only Trump needs to win New Hampshire. She doesn't really need to start winning states yet. Is that how most political strategists would see it, though?
I have completely seen it that way. And, shame on Tim Scott for thinking that that lukewarm win that Donald Trump had in Iowa somehow seals the deal for this nomination. This is a bizarre race. I tell you, because we have not seen anything like this on the Republican side in a while. You cannot compare this to 2016. The way this nomination is going to be won is by feeling the pulse of the Republican electorate, and I don't think that can be felt until Super Tuesday. Now, I get that we're going to be where we're at, very tense in March, and the math has to be there. Again, we're looking at something like 1,200 delegates for somebody to win over in order to outright get the nomination. But I want you all to think a step further. I was a delegate to the 2016 nomination, the first one to speak out against Trump when I was elected, when he was a presumptive nominee. That summer, we tried to deny him the nomination on the floor of the convention, and it didn't work. This time, I think if there is a rebellion, it can possibly happen, and there's a greater chance for him to be denied the nomination on the floor of the Republican convention this summer than there was in 2016 because of the sentiment that's in the electorate.
But Jamal, do you think this is just an effort by Trump rolling out these endorsements earlier than expected to just put the nomination away, to have it done? And so then we're going to have the longest general election contest of our lives, it's going to feel like.
Of course he wants to do that, right? Because he really wants to get the campaign going, to be able to use the money that he has to go after Joe Biden, all those things. I got to go back to what Tim Scott just said. It was the most maddening endorsement of Donald Trump. I can't imagine Tim Scott giving him that he doesn't see black or white. Tim Scott is somebody who we think of as being optimistic and inclusive, and he's got a vision that seems like it's from an old era of republicanism where everybody gets to be involved. Donald Trump doesn't see black or white. Remember when Donald Trump was running for president the last time, and he said there was a judge in Indiana who couldn't say anything about him because he had Mexican heritage, right? He's a member of a party that is fueled by this MAGAism that goes after diversity and inclusion. Ron DeSantis, who takes out slavery and the bad effects of slavery from the books in Florida. They can't say slavery caused a civil war. I mean, you go on and on about how race is a part of the movement that it is that he is driving. And then Tim Scott has the nerve to say he doesn't see black or white. It's outrageous.
Also, he perpetuated the birther conspiracy about Obama and amplified it. In recent days, he has been making racially charged attacks about Nikki Haley, amplifying a post questioning whether or not she was qualified to be president. She's born in South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not something that was happened 10 years ago, and it's not happening now.
That's right. It's happening right now, including like mispronouncing her name and putting her birth name out as if it's a way to come after her legitimacy as a president. And by the way, her name, she could have that name and still be an American citizen.
She does.
Right,
That's what we are.
exactly.
Jamal Simmons.
Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, like we're Jamal Simmons, right? We're in America where we all get to have Rina Shah. We all get to have whatever name it is that we have.
Jamal Simmons, Rina Shah, Rob Godfrey, thank you all for being here tonight. Also tonight, as the former president is amping up those attacks on Nikki Haley, as I noted, some of them are racially